Hey everyone, before we get into the video, I want to quickly announce our brand new Academy course we've been working on over on the website. With over 8 hours of content, this course is designed to take you from 0 to 100 in Valorant in terms of what you know. Our Radiant coaches spent the time making these courses that are tailored to one goal in mind, helping you become the best player you can be in the shortest amount of time possible. We streamlined the whole process. So, what are you waiting for? Be sure to check out SkillCapped.com and let's get into the video. In a game like Valorant, sometimes it's the little things that make the biggest difference. Whether that's deciding to jiggle peek and angle instead of full swinging, reloading your weapon at the wrong time, or even waiting a couple of extra seconds for an important ability to come off cooldown. Think about it. How many times has something as simple as one cool off angle gotten you free kills? Those kills win rounds. And now think about how many rounds you otherwise might have lost had you not known that one small bit of information. So today, what we're going to do is go over one tip for every single agent, brought to you by our top immortal coaches. Now, to kick off this list, we're starting out with Astra. Not quite what you might be expecting, but I highly suggest that you're abusing her recall ability as much as possible. This sounds like a very simple tip, but it's a little more complicated than you might think. For one, I've seen way too many platinum and even diamond level Astras rotate over to a site and not recall their stars right away. This leaves them in a spot where they're forced to either wait for them to come off cooldown, or more often than not, be forced to retake without her utility. Having those extra stars to be able to smoke and place down a gravity well can make it so much more likely that your team succeeds on a retake. On top of that, too many players forget that recalling an Astra star pops up a smoke for a couple of seconds. This is so powerful because it effectively gives Astra a makeshift jet smoke that doesn't cost her anything since she gets the star back. This is great for situations where you or a teammate are stuck and need a quick smoke to get out, or if you need to retrieve the spike and don't want to waste the star. It's also a really powerful mind game tool since you can fake smoke and angle off, peek, and then the enemies will be caught off guard when the smoke goes down. Astra is unique in many ways, but one way that people don't think about is that she has that hidden extra ability to play with that she can use to her advantage. The next agent on this list is Breach, and the tip I'm going to give you when playing him is to use your fault line to create space for your team. Yes, it can be nice to stun an enemy and nab yourself a free kill, but the truth is that this ability is really easy to dodge. Unless you catch an enemy stuck in a corner, or you're playing on a map like Fracture with a lot of narrow hallways, you'll find it's difficult to actually get value out of your fault line. So instead, focus on using the ability to get enemies off of angles they might be holding to allow your team to push in. A perfect example of this is on Fracture, where you can stun A main as soon as the barrier goes down to force enemies that might be holding the angle to back off for a second. This gives your team the room to push in without worrying about an enemy holding that angle. In this situation, it gets about as much value as a Sky Dog, except it's on a free ability that comes back after 40 seconds. Using fault line like this might not reflect on the scoreboard, but it will help your team win more rounds by getting them onto site more safely. The next tip on this list is for everyone's favorite military man, Brimstone. The tip I'm going to give you for Brimstone is to not just use your ultimate for post-plant and instead look for other good opportunities. I see way too many Brimstones hold onto their ultimate for multiple rounds to the point where they could have honestly used it 3 times in the amount of time it took them to use it once. You don't have to just use Brim ult to stall the enemy team from defusing. There are plenty of other great situations where you can use it. One good situation is when an enemy is stuck in a corner. For example, if you're playing on Ascent and you know an enemy went towards Wine, you can ult it and they're going to be stuck with nowhere to go. You can also use Orbital Strike to counter other enemy ultimates. A common example is using it to destroy Killjoy's lockdown, but you can also use it on a Phoenix ult since after the ult's duration ends, they teleport back to where they started and can't move for a couple seconds. Similarly, you can even use it to counter Sage's res since it takes a second for that player to become active again. There are so many great ways to use a Brim ult besides just ulting the spike, and keeping examples like the ones I just mentioned in mind can really help you on your climb. With that, it's time to give you guys a tip for the first Sentinel on this list, Chamber. Honestly, with Chamber, the best tip I can give you is to use your ultimate to help your team's economy. Chamber's ultimate is very strong and can win rounds on its own because of its quick fire rate and ability to slow other enemies in the area. But what makes it so powerful is that it gives your team a free operator for a round, which can really help your team's economy. When ulting, you should make sure that you don't also have a gun on you, since it's kind of a waste of credits. Instead, when you do decide to use Chamber's operator, you should think about either dropping one of your teammates a gun or use it on a save to help secure rounds where your team's economy is poor. You can also use it instead of buying a gun to help you afford an op the next round. Lastly, make sure you're using this ability as much as possible, as it effectively saves your team 2,900 credits every time you do. Holding onto it for multiple rounds for no reason can cost you and your team a lot of credits. Next agent on the list is yet another Sentinel, Cypher. The immortal tip I'm going to give you for Cypher is to place your cam in a position where it won't be easily destroyed. Probably the easiest way to do this is to place it on a wall above a choke that enemies are going to push through. The reason this is so effective is because an enemy team can't see a camera like this until after they've already passed the choke. Usually at that point, players are not going to turn around and look behind them for no reason. So by keeping your camera in a position like this, you can see everything that's going on, who's on site, as well as where enemies are playing. And until you shoot and tag an enemy, players aren't going to notice. Here's an example of a cam I use on Haven A site. This camera is great for clearing graffiti, default, and can even see a bit of hell if an enemy is peeking out. The reason this cam is so nice is because clearing someone who's playing in graffiti can be really tricky sometimes, since players from hell or default can swing you while you're checking it. But by using our camera for retake, we make it so much easier to clear these angles safely. This same principle is usable on pretty much every site in the game, and it's probably one of the biggest things Cypher players mess up, so I highly encourage you to use this one more often. The next immortal tip on this list is for Jett, and the tip I'm going to give the Jett mains out there is to play more aggressive in off angles. Most players will clear common angles, usually around corners, so by standing somewhere unexpected, you can catch enemies off guard and get free kills when they don't take the time to clear you. Because of Jett's dash, she can play in these weird positions without getting punished. I can't tell you how many times I've died to a Jett standing in what should be a really bad spot, but I die because I'm just not expecting her to be there. You should pretty much never be playing in a common position if you're Jett and have your dash available. So if you're looking to climb as Jett, that is probably the best tip I can give you. With that, it's now time for KO mains to get some love. KO has actually been seeing a lot more play as of recently, so if you're a player that wants to play him or already plays him, the immortal tip I want to give you is save your knife for the enemy team's push. This tip is specific to defense, but it's still an important one to understand. A big mistake I see a lot of KO mains make is that they always just throw their knife right at the start of the round, or a couple of seconds into a round to see if any enemies are near them. This can be good if you happen to tag a few enemies, but there's a way you can use it to get a lot more value. Rather than just throwing it out right away, you can wait for some key utility that an enemy team uses to slow them down and force them to make a tough decision. If you see smokes go down, a Jett dash or a Sova dart, these are usually abilities that indicate that an enemy team is about to push. By throwing your knife right when you see one of those key abilities, you put the enemy team in an uncomfortable spot. You force the enemy team to just sit there and wait, losing out on their smokes, or any utility they used prior to their push. This gives your team plenty of time to rotate over to help. In the case of a Jett dash, you also leave her stuck in the open without her team, or the ability to smoke herself either. Getting the most value out of KO's knife is all about the timing, and getting better at timing it correctly is a great way to help you win more games. It's now time to talk about one of my personal favorite agents, Killjoy, and the tip I'm going to give you when playing her is to pop your mollies a little early on post plants. A very common strategy on attack when playing Killjoy is to get the spike down and then place both your mollies down on top of it. The mistake most players make is that they wait until players tap the spike before they actually pop their mollies. The problem with this is that as you climb the ladder, enemies are not going to wait for you to just pop them. They're going to shoot your mollies beforehand to deny you from ever getting value from them. Detonating them early is so strong because you can still get the value from stalling with them and you don't have to risk them being destroyed. At the end of the day, if you time both mollies correctly, they can stall for 8 total seconds, and making sure you get this value from them is usually more important than getting the extra half a second waiting for the enemy to tap. And this is something that I personally changed in my gameplay as I climbed that absolutely helped me win more games. The next tip on this list is for Valorant's newest agent, Neon. The tip I'm going to give you has to do with what I believe to be her strongest ability, Relay Bolt. And the tip I'm going to give you is that you need to learn to take advantage of the ricochet to stun the areas you want. This is important for 2 reasons. First of all, if you use it correctly, you can actually stun not 1 but 2 key areas at the same time, since it stuns both areas hit. For example, on a map like Ascent, you can stun both Market and Stairs if you angle yourself correctly. These are 2 spots that enemies love to play, so this is great to know. The other reason that learning how to control the ricochet is so important is that it will allow you to stun enemies without ever having to peek them. This is especially important in situations where the enemies have an op. Instead of putting yourself in danger, there are sometimes situations where you can stun the op without actually having to peek it. It's important to take advantage of these situations when you find yourself in them, because while stunned, players can't scope in with the op. This forces them to fall back, giving you and your team the space to take control of the site. I recommend going into a custom game and trying to stun popular angles that enemies like to hold to get a hang of the trajectory of the ability, since it can get tricky sometimes. With that, we're now halfway through this list, and the next tip I'm going to give you is for everyone's favorite Ghost ghost boy, Omen. The immortal tip I want to give you for Omen is to try to make plays around your smokes. Players will very often use utility when they pop out of a smoke, whether it's by flashing or a jet dashing out of it. Either way, players are very cautious when they attempt to leave an enemy smoke. But the thing is, most players aren't that cautious when they enter a smoke. Most players are not going to flash into a smoke. Usually they just shift walk into it, which means that it's very easy to sneak a kill by hiding in it and then run away to safety. Omen's smokes are also unique in that he's able to put them inside of walls to create one-ways where other controllers can't. There are so many places that this can be done, and I suggest trying some out in a custom game to get used to them. Omen can also teleport on top of boxes to play off these one-ways, making him really hard to deal with. So if you're an Omen main, try this out and see how it goes. Now that we're all done with Omen, it's time I give you guys a tip for Phoenix. The tip I'm going to give revolves around his molly. The thing that makes Phoenix's molly unique is that it doesn't damage him if he stands in it, and instead, it heals him. This means that it's a molly that Phoenix can push through, and that's where this tip comes in. It's very important that when you're pushing onto a site with Phoenix, that you use your molly to block off a choke point to prevent enemies from pushing. But that's not the tip. No, the tip is that you can also sometimes push through the molly to sneak kills on unsuspecting enemies. The thing is that everyone knows that Phoenix doesn't take damage from his molly, but despite that, players still don't usually hold a choke where you can put your molly down, so a lot of the time, if you push through it, you can catch enemies off guard by doing this. Of course, don't do this all the time because players in your lobby will catch on eventually, but if you do this a couple times a half, you will find this to be quite effective. Continuing with the duelists, the next tip I'm going to be giving you is for Raze. This one is less of a tip about what you can do in a game and instead something you should do beforehand. The tip is to practice double satcheling with Raze in a custom game. This is a huge part of Raze's kit, and getting comfortable with her movement is necessary if you want to climb with her. You need to be able to double satchel to entry for your team, as well as to get the most out of her ultimate. When it comes to Raze's ult, it's important to get high ground on an enemy, so that when your rocket hits the ground, it takes advantage of the splash damage. If you don't, then it's a lot harder to hit enemies, especially if they are on the high ground, since you have to hit them head on. And double satcheling with Raze is one of the best ways to get that high ground. So if you want to play Raze and you're not comfortable with her satchels, I highly recommend you create a custom lobby and start practicing. Moving on to another duelist though, let's talk about Reyna. When you get a kill or assist as Reyna, as we all know, Reyna will get an orb that she can either decide to dismiss or heal with. But what many players don't acknowledge is that you don't actually have to make this decision that quickly. The orb stays out for a few seconds, so you can actually wait, see if another enemy peeks you, and then either dismiss away or heal. This will help you get more information for you and your team, and in the case where you decide to heal, you won't just get instantly traded. I see way too many Reyna players just instantly take their orbs when it's not completely necessary, effectively wasting them. You only get 2, so you should be trying to get as much value out of them as you can. Speaking of orbs though, let's talk a bit about Sage. Although a fairly basic agent, one more advanced tactic you can do with Sage is using her ultimate as a bait for the enemies. This isn't applicable to every situation, but I'm going to try my best to explain when this trick is useful. For starters, of course, if there is a teammate that dies in a really safe position, you can just res them without much worry. But if there's an enemy around, you can't always get the res off safely. So in a situation where you know there's only one enemy near you, either because you're in a 1v1 or because you have info about the rest of the enemy team, you can res a teammate's body to fish that player out. By letting them kill your newly resurrected teammate, you can then peek them to trade the kill immediately, since their crosshair and bullet spread are both going to be messed up. I will warn you though that it's very important that you don't die trying this trick. I see too many Sages try to hold the body and get the res off, but this is really risky since if you don't win the gunfight, you'll lose your life and your ultimate. I can't stress enough how important it is that you stay alive, and would even consider hiding until the enemy starts shooting first if that's what it takes. We're now nearing the end of this list, but there are still a few more agents left to talk about, and the next one in the queue is Skye. Lower level players tend to always flash really far away and pretty much only use it to get info. While that can be good in some situations, it's not always the best way to use it. The thing is that when you flash like this, it's very easy to dodge because you give players so much time to react since they can hear it coming. On top of that, since the flash is so far away from you, and most likely your teammates as well, no one is really in position to capitalize on it, even if you do end up blinding an enemy. So my immortal tip for Skye is to start pop flashing with her more. Popping her flash quickly around a corner or standing in a smoke and quickly popping it on the other side is the best way to use it. That's because it gives enemies the least amount of time possible to be able to react to it, making it more likely that you'll fully blind someone and be able to confirm a kill on them. Remember, even though Skye's flash can get information, because of her sound cue, it's still a flash first, and you should be trying to use it like one as often as you can. Next up on this list is yet another initiator, Sova. My tip for you Sova players out there is to learn how to dart behind enemies instead of in front of them. If you know any of the best Sova dart spots, they're pretty much in positions where they would be off the screen of most players in an area. There are a few reasons you want to dart behind the enemies. For one, it makes it way harder to shoot, and more likely that it gets off at least one ping. It also messes up their crosshair placement since they're forced to turn around, which makes them an easy kill for a duelist pushing onto site. I personally love doing this on defense to scan multiple enemies as they're pushing to get a ton of free kills. It works even more perfect once the enemies have committed onto site, as turning around leaves them incredibly vulnerable. I can't tell you how hard it is to deal with this strategy, and if you're a Sova main, I'd highly recommend abusing it whenever you play him. The next agent on the list is yet another one of my personal faves, Viper. Viper is one of those agents that you can really carry with if you know what you're doing. And what I'm going to tell you today is going to help you do that. My tip for the Viper mains is to reposition anytime an enemy knows where you are while you're ulting. Some of you might be confused by what I mean, so I'm going to try to explain as best I can. A lot of the times when Viper ults, the only way a team can really win is if they find and kill the Viper. When playing Viper, you need to make sure your position is never compromised. As Viper, if you molly the spike or shoot a bullet, enemies can hear which direction that came from. So when you throw your molly down, you should instantly start walking to another location. This will make enemies look for you in your old position, but since you already left, they won't be able to find you. You can then molly the bomb again from your new position and stall the defuse even longer. You could even consider leaving your ultimate sometimes, since enemies usually expect you to be hiding in it, just adding to the mind game. When played this way, it's very easy to clutch rounds where your team is at a big numbers disadvantage. I personally clutched so many rounds that were 1v2s or 1v3s just because I had my ultimate online, and a large part of it was because of this tip. With that, we finally reached the end of this list, and of course, who could forget about Yoru? The tip I want to give you guys when you play Yoru is to start using your footsteps to mess with the enemy team's utility. This is good for multiple reasons, and I'll explain why. On defense, this can be good for denying the enemy team information by setting off certain enemy utility or just confusing them with the sound. For example, on Bind, it's very common for Razes to boombot hookah to clear it out. By setting your footsteps down before the round starts, you can actually have the bot trigger off them and pretty much waste the ability. On attack, you want to set down your footsteps for a different reason. The thing about playing Valorant is that sometimes you can win a round just because you conditioned an enemy with some util and then later break this pattern to catch them off guard. By using a set of footsteps in the same place every round, you can get the enemy comfortable with hearing them when you're not there. Then when you actually want to push or lurk there, you can follow your footsteps in, and enemies won't be expecting you to be there because of how you conditioned them the rest of the half. In Valorant, it's the little things that can win you rounds, and with Yoru, nothing could be more true. Lastly, remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to SkillCapped, and if you're really looking to improve at any of these agents, I highly suggest checking out our Radiant courses on the site. It's your one-stop shop for everything you need to know to master any agent in the game. It's also backed by our rank improvement guarantee, so it's literally no risk. So what are you waiting for? Get started on your journey today by clicking that link in the description below. Anyway, that's all for this video. If you feel like any of these tips helped you, let us know in the comments. Also, if you made it all the way to the end, don't forget to leave a like. As always, we here at SkillCapped want to thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.